He was known as a man who never lost control. In offices across the city, his name carried weight. People lowered their voices when he walked by. Meetings stopped when he entered a room. His decisions moved money, changed careers, and shaped companies. He had built everything from the ground up, or at least, that was the story people liked to tell about him. To the outside world, he was a symbol of success. Calm, sharp, always ahead of everyone else. At home, house was large, quiet, and perfectly organized. Every piece of furniture was chosen carefully. Nothing was out of place. The walls were clean, the floors shined, and the rooms felt more like a hotel than a family home. Staff came and went quietly, doing their work with respect and distance. The house never felt messy, but it also never felt warm. The girl had lived there for years, yet she still walked softly, as if she were a guest who might be asked to leave. She had learned early where she was allowed to sit and where she was not. She knew which rooms were used often and which stayed closed most of the time. She knew when to speak and when silence was safer. She had been adopted when she was very young. She did not remember much about the life before this house. Some memories came as broken pictures, faces without clear shapes, voices without words, and places without names. What she remembered most clearly was the day she arrived. The man had stood in front of her, tall and serious, wearing a dark suit, even though it was not a working day. He had looked down at her and said she was safe now, that she would have everything she needed, and in many ways, he had kept that promise. She had the best schools, private tutors, new clothes, and a bedroom bigger than most apartments. She never worried about food or safety. Doctors were always available. Teachers gave her attention. No one ever raised their voice at her in anger. From the outside, her life looked lucky, but there were things no one could see. The man believed love was shown through providing. He believed that if a child had comfort and opportunity, then emotional pain would naturally disappear. His own childhood had been hard. He had learned to survive by staying focused and pushing forward. Feelings, in his world, were distractions. He did not know how to sit with them, especially not with a child's feelings, so he worked. Early mornings and late nights became normal. Breakfasts were rushed. Dinners were often missed. When he was home, his phone never left his hand. Even when he sat across from her at the table, his attention was elsewhere. He listened, but only halfway. He answered, but without depth. At first, when she was younger, she tried. She told him about her day at school. She talked about a drawing she made, a story she read, a classmate who laughed at her joke. He nodded. Sometimes he smiled. Often, he said he was proud. But his eyes were on emails, messages, and numbers only he could see. When she asked questions, he gave short answers. When she needed comfort, he offered solutions instead of understanding. If she said she felt sad, he reminded her how lucky she was. If she cried, he told her to be strong. Slowly, she learned that feelings were not welcome at the table. She became quiet, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned that saying it did not change anything. Silence became her way of staying safe. She observed more than she spoke. She listened more than she shared. At school, teachers described her as polite and mature for her age. She never caused trouble. She followed rules carefully. Other children laughed loudly and argued openly, but she kept her emotions under control. Adults praised her for it. Not realizing what it cost her, at home, the house remained calm. But something invisible grew heavier with each passing year. The man noticed changes, but he did not understand them. He saw that she no longer ran to greet him. He noticed she stayed longer in her room. He saw that she stopped asking questions. He assumed it was just part of growing up. Children became distant, he thought. That was normal. He did not notice the small moments that mattered. He did not notice the way. She waited outside his office door, holding a paper she wanted to show him before quietly folding it and walking away. He did not see her sit alone during school events, scanning the crowd and hoping he would appear. He did not hear the hesitation in her voice when she asked if he was busy. To him, time was something to manage. To her, time was something she was losing with him. Years passed like this. Comfort stayed. Distance grew. The girl entered her teenage years carrying questions she had never asked out loud. Who was she to him, really? A responsibility? A good decision? A duty fulfilled? She knew he cared in his own way, but she could not feel it. And feeling unseen hurt more than being alone. She learned to rely on herself. She kept a journal she never showed anyone. In it, she wrote the things she could not say. She wrote about wanting to be heard without interrupting, about wanting him to look at her when she spoke, about wishing he would ask how she felt and actually wait for the answer. The man, meanwhile, continued building his empire. Awards lined his office shelves. Articles praised his leadership. People called him inspiring. He accepted compliments with calm confidence, unaware that the one person whose approval he truly needed felt invisible. One evening, simple conversation set the stage for what was coming. It was nothing dramatic at first. She tried to speak about something that had been bothering her at school. He interrupted her midway, correcting details and offering advice she had not asked for. His voice was firm, confident, and familiar. She stopped talking. He did not notice right away that silence was not empty. It was full of years she had swallowed her words, moments she had waited, and feelings she had learned to hide. Something inside her shifted. Not anger, not rebellion, just tiredness. This was not the moment yet. But it was close, because sometimes before a truth is spoken, there is a long quiet where everything becomes clear. And in that quiet, the girl finally understood something important about herself. She realized she had spent her life trying to fit into a space that never made room for her voice. She realized she was allowed to want more than comfort. She was allowed to want connection. The man stood up, already moving toward his next task. Unaware that the foundation of his carefully controlled world was about to crack, the quiet that followed stayed with her long after she returned to her room that night. She sat on her bed, the soft light from the lamp falling across the walls, and replayed the conversation in her mind. Every word she had wanted to say, but did not say, felt heavy. She was not angry. Anger would have been easier. What she felt was something deeper, something that had been growing slowly for years without a name. She opened her notebook and began to write again. The pen moved carefully, as if the words themselves were fragile. She wrote about the way his voice always filled the room, leaving no space for hers. She wrote about how she practiced conversations in her head, only to lose courage when the moment came. She wrote about wanting him to listen, not to fix, not to correct, just to listen. Downstairs, the man reviewed reports on his tablet. Numbers made sense to him. Patterns, risks, outcomes, these were things he understood. He believed problems existed to be solved. He did not see silence as a problem. To him, silence meant peace, control, order. He thought about his daughter briefly, the way one might think about an item on a long list. He reminded himself that she had everything she needed. He believed that was enough. Days passed. Life continued in its usual rhythm. She went to school, completed her work, smiled when expected, and stayed quiet when it felt safer. He went to meetings, made decisions, and received praise. From the outside, nothing changed. But inside both of them, something was slowly shifting. The girl began to notice things more clearly. She noticed how other parents listened, even when they were tired. She noticed how friends were allowed to speak without being corrected every time. She noticed how being heard changed people. These observations did not make her jealous. They made her thoughtful. She started asking herself questions she had avoided for years. Was it wrong to want attention? Was it ungrateful to want emotional closeness when she had been given so much? She carried these questions quietly, afraid that asking them out loud would sound like complaint. One afternoon, she returned home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, and she walked past the office door where the man was working. She stopped for a moment, hand raised, then lowered it again. She turned away, not because she did not want to speak, but because she did not know how. That hesitation became familiar. It followed her everywhere. The man noticed her less and less. Not because he did not care, but because he assumed her independence meant strength. He believed he had taught her well by giving her space. He did not realize that space, when given without warmth, can feel like distance instead of freedom. At night, the house remained still. Two people lived under the same roof, connected by a legal bond and shared history, yet separated by unspoken truths. This was how the story truly began, not with a loud argument or a dramatic event, but with quiet misunderstandings, missed chances, and love expressed in ways that never reached the heart it was meant for. And slowly, without either of them realizing it, they were moving toward a moment that would change everything. The days after that quiet evening moved forward without any visible change. But inside the house, something felt different. The girl woke up each morning with a strange mix of heaviness and clarity. For the first time, she was no longer confused about what hurt. She knew now. It was not the rules, the discipline, or even the long hours he worked. It was the feeling of speaking into empty space. She continued her routine carefully. She dressed neatly, finished her schoolwork on time, and spoke politely when spoken to. Teachers still praised her calm nature. Classmates still saw her as the quiet one. No one suspected how much effort it took to remain so controlled. At home, she spent more time in her room, not to hide, but to breathe. It was the only place where she did not feel interrupted. She read books slowly, not to escape reality, but to understand it. Stories helped her see that emotions were not weaknesses. They were part of being human. The man, meanwhile, felt an unfamiliar restlessness. He could not explain it, and because he could not explain it, he ignored it. He added more work to his schedule, believing productivity would push away the discomfort. He stayed later at the office and took more calls at home, but sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and his phone screen finally went dark, he noticed the silence felt different than before. It felt heavier, less controlled. He told himself it was nothing. One afternoon, he received a message from the school requesting a meeting. It was not urgent, but it was personal. He almost asked an assistant to handle it, then paused. Something made him agree to attend himself. The meeting was simple. The teacher spoke kindly, explaining that the girl was doing well academically, but seemed withdrawn. She rarely asked for help and avoided attention. The teacher said this gently, without blame. He nodded, thanked the teacher, and left. In the car, he replayed the words in his mind. Withdrawn. Avoided attention. He had heard similar descriptions before and dismissed them as personality traits. This time they stayed with him. That evening, he tried something new. He sat at the table without his phone. When she joined him, she noticed immediately. She hesitated, unsure of what to say. He asked her how her day was. She answered briefly. She always did. He waited. The silence stretched. She looked at him, surprised. He was looking at her, not past her. For a moment she thought about speaking honestly, but fear held her back. Habits built over years do not disappear in one night. The moment passed, but something important had happened. A door had cracked open, even if neither of them knew how to walk through it yet. Over the next few days, man noticed things he had missed before. He noticed how she paused before answering questions, as if checking whether her words were welcome. He noticed how she listened more than she spoke. He noticed how careful she was not to take up space. These observations made him uncomfortable. They challenged the story he had told himself about being a good provider and a good father. The girl noticed changes too, small ones. He interrupted less. He asked questions and waited for answers. Sometimes he still slipped back into old habits, but she saw the effort. It confused her more than comforted her. Trust, she knew, was not rebuilt quickly. Inside her, two feelings existed at once: hope and caution. She wanted to believe things could change, but she was afraid of expecting too much. One evening, she gathered the courage to speak about something that mattered to her. Halfway through, he began to respond with advice. She froze, her heart sinking. Then he stopped himself. He closed his mouth and nodded instead. It was a small moment, but it meant more to her than he could understand. Still, the weight of the past remained. Years of silence do not disappear overnight. And both of them were slowly learning that real connection requires patience, honesty, and the courage to sit with discomfort. This part of their journey was quiet, uncertain, and fragile. But it was real, and somewhere beneath the surface, both of them knew that a deeper conversation was coming. One that could no longer be avoided. The change that had started quietly now began to press against the walls of the house. It was no longer just small pauses or careful questions. Something deeper was rising, something that could not stay hidden much longer. The girl felt it every day. She felt it when she sat in class and stared at the board without seeing it. She felt it when she walked home and slowed her steps, unsure whether she wanted to arrive or delay the moment. She felt it at night, lying awake while the house slept. Her thoughts louder than any sound. She was tired of holding herself together. For years, she had believed that being quiet was the same as being strong. She had believed that not needing anything was a way to survive. But now she was beginning to understand that strength without connection turns into loneliness. At school, a small incident pushed her closer to the edge. It was not dramatic. No shouting, no public scene. A teacher asked her to speak in front of the class about a project she had worked on for weeks. When she stood up, words failed her. Her chest tightened, and her mind went blank. She managed to finish, but her hands shook the entire time. After class, the teacher gently asked if everything was all right at home. She nodded. The lie came easily. That scared her. That evening, she sat at the dinner table across from the man who had built his life on confidence and control. He spoke about his day, about a deal that had gone well, about plans for the future. His voice filled the room as it always had. She listened. She always did. But inside her, something broke loose. When he finally paused, she tried to speak. Her voice was soft at first, unsure. She began to talk about school, about feeling overwhelmed, about not knowing how to explain what she felt. He interrupted her, not harshly, not with anger, just the familiar habit of taking control of the conversation. He began to explain what she should do, how she should think, how she should handle it. And suddenly, she could not take it anymore, before she could stop herself. The words came out. "Please be quiet." The room froze. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled under the table. She was not shouting. She was not angry. She was exhausted. The man stared at her, stunned. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not in boardrooms. Not at home. Especially not her. For a moment, he felt anger rise. His body reacted before his mind. He opened his mouth to correct her, to remind her who he was. Then he saw her face. Her eyes were not defiant. They were tired, wet, but not crying. Filled with something he had never allowed himself to see before, she continued, her voice shaking now, but stronger with every word. She told him how it felt to never finish a sentence, how it felt to be heard only halfway, how it felt to grow up in a house where everything was provided, except space for her feelings. Each word landed like weight. He wanted to interrupt. The habit was deep, but this time he stayed quiet. As she spoke, memories surfaced that he had pushed aside for years. Missed dinners, half-listened conversations, promises to talk later that never came, he realized. Something in that moment that shook him more than any failure at work ever had. He had not been present, not truly. The silence after she finished speaking was long and heavy. Neither of them moved. For the first time, the house did not feel controlled. It felt honest. He finally spoke, but his voice was different, quieter, uncertain. He did not defend himself. He did not explain. He simply said he did not realize how much he had hurt her. She did not answer. Not because she did not hear him, but because she needed time to believe him. That night, both of them slept poorly. She cried quietly into her pillow, unsure if she had ruined everything or saved herself. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment he had chosen work over, listening. The balance between them had shifted. Nothing could return to the way it was before, and that was both terrifying and necessary. The morning after that, night felt unfamiliar to both of them. The house looked the same, quiet and orderly, but the air carried something heavier. Words that had been spoken could not be taken back. Silence now meant something different. The man woke early, as he always did, but he did not reach for his phone right away. He lay still, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment again and again. The sound of her voice saying those words stayed with him. It was not the sentence itself that hurt the most. It was what it represented. Years of not listening. Years of believing that providing was enough. For the first time in his life, he questioned himself without trying to fix the feeling. He did not push it away. He let it sit. Down the hall, the girl woke with a tight feeling in her chest. Her first thought was regret. Not because she had spoken, but because she did not know what would happen next. She had finally said the truth, and now she felt exposed, vulnerable. She wondered if she had gone too far. She moved quietly through her morning routine, careful not to make noise. When she entered the kitchen, she froze for a moment. He was already there. They looked at each other. Neither spoke. He poured coffee and sat at the table, instead of standing by the counter. That small choice mattered more than words. When she sat across from him, he did not open his laptop. He did not check his phone. "I'm listening," he said. The words felt awkward in his mouth, but they were honest. She did not speak right away. Trust did not return simply because an apology was offered. It returned slowly, through actions. He waited. That patience was new. Throughout the day, the man found it impossible to focus on work. Meetings blurred together. Numbers lost meaning. For the first time, success felt empty. He realized how much of his identity was built around being respected and in control, and how little room that left for emotional failure. He remembered the day he adopted her. He remembered promising to protect her, to give her a better life. He had done that in measurable ways, but he had failed in ways that could not be measured. That realization hurt. More than any loss he had faced before, the girl spent the day at school feeling distracted. Part of her hoped nothing would change, because change was frightening. Another part of her hoped everything would. When she returned home, he asked if she would like to take a walk with him. Not a command. An invitation, she agreed cautiously. They walked side by side without rushing. He did not fill the silence. He let it exist. When she finally spoke, he listened without interrupting. She talked about how small she felt growing up, how she learned to disappear, how being quiet became a habit she could not break. Each word felt like a confession. He did not defend himself. He did not explain his intentions. He accepted her experience as real. That night, after she went to bed, he sat alone in the living room. He thought about how easy it had been to believe he was doing everything right because no one challenged him. He thought about how success had protected him from seeing his own mistakes. This part of his life could not be managed like a business problem. It required humility. The following days were slow and uncomfortable. Conversations were careful. Mistakes still happened. He interrupted once and stopped himself. She withdrew once and then tried again. Healing was not smooth, but something important had changed. The house no longer felt like a place where silence was required. It felt like a place where voices were learning how to exist together. Both of them were learning something new. That love was not proven by perfection, but by presence. By listening even when it was uncomfortable, this was not the end of their struggle. It was the beginning of honesty, and honesty once spoken could not be undone. Time did not fix everything, but it changed how they moved through each day. The weeks after that honest turning point were slow and uncertain. There were no dramatic moments, no perfect conversations. Instead, there were small choices made again and again that slowly shaped something new. The man began to rearrange his life in quiet ways. He left meetings earlier than before. He stopped scheduling calls late at night. These decisions did not come easily. Every habit he had built over decades pushed against the change. But each time he chose to be present, he felt something shift inside him for the first time. He began to understand that listening was not passive. It required effort. It required putting aside his need to control outcomes. The girl noticed these changes, but she did not rush to trust them. Trust, she knew, was fragile. She allowed herself to observe without expectation. When he asked questions, she answered carefully. When he listened, she tested the silence to see if it would hold. Some days were easier than others. There were moments when old patterns returned. He interrupted once without realizing it, and she shut down immediately. The pain of that reaction surprised both of them. It showed how deep the wound had been. Instead of defending himself, he apologized. The word felt unfamiliar on his tongue, but it mattered. Slowly, conversations grew longer. They spoke about ordinary things at first. School, books, small worries. Then, gradually, they spoke about harder things. About fear. About feeling unwanted. About the pressure of expectations. The girl admitted she had spent years believing she was easy to forget. Saying it out loud hurt, but it also freed her. She was no longer carrying the weight alone. The man listened, truly listened, without trying to explain or correct. Each story she shared rewrote something inside him. He realized that his greatest failure had not been in making mistakes, but in refusing to see them. One evening, they sat together in the living room, not talking, just sharing space. The silence was calm, not heavy. That silence felt like progress. He understood now that love did not need to be loud or perfect. It needed to be consistent. The girl began to feel something she had not felt before in that house. Safety. Not physical safety, which she had always had, but emotional safety. The kind that allows someone to speak without fear of interruption. She started to imagine a future where her voice mattered, where she did not have to disappear to be accepted. The man, in his quiet moments, reflected on the life he had built. Success still mattered to him, but it no longer defined him. He understood that being respected by strangers meant little if he could not be trusted by the person who mattered most. They were not a perfect family. They never would be. But they were real. The journey they shared taught them both the same lesson from different sides: that love without listening is incomplete. That providing without presence leaves emptiness behind. The moment she told him to be quiet had not been an act of disrespect. It had been an act of truth. And truth, once spoken, had given them both a chance to begin again. Life did not suddenly become easy after everything that had been said. Healing was not a straight road. It moved forward, then paused, then sometimes stepped back. Both of them were learning something they had never practiced before: how to stay present when emotions became uncomfortable. The girl began to notice her own reactions more clearly. She noticed how quickly she expected to be ignored, how easily she pulled back when conversations felt uncertain. These habits had protected her for years. But now they sometimes stood in the way of what she wanted most. She struggled with that. There were moments when she wanted to speak freely but felt her throat tighten. The fear of being interrupted still lived inside her. Even when the man listened patiently, part of her waited for the old pattern to return. The man noticed this too. He saw how carefully she chose her words, how often she stopped herself. Each hesitation reminded him of how deeply his past behavior had shaped her. This realization stayed with him during the day. In meetings, he caught himself interrupting others and stopped. He began to listen more than he spoke, not just at home, but everywhere. People noticed the change. Some were confused by it. Others respected him more, but none of that mattered as much as what happened at home. One evening, the girl came home upset. It was written on her face, though she tried to hide it. Normally, she would have gone straight to her room. This time, she paused in the hallway. He noticed, instead of asking questions right away, he simply said that he was there if she wanted to talk. She hesitated. Then she sat down. What followed was not a smooth conversation. Her words came out unevenly. She struggled to explain why she felt hurt, why something small had affected her so deeply. She expected him to fix it, to give advice, to explain it away. He did none of that. He listened. When she finished, there was a long silence. This silence felt different than the ones before. It felt safe. He told her that her feelings made sense, that they did not need to be corrected. That simple statement changed something inside her. She realized that she did not have to earn the right to be heard. She already had it. The man, on the other hand, faced moments of regret that came without warning. Sometimes a memory would surface suddenly, a time she had tried to talk, a moment he had brushed aside. These memories hurt, but he no longer pushed them away. He accepted them as part of his responsibility. One night, he admitted something he had never said out loud before. He told her that he had been afraid of failing, afraid of emotions he did not know how to handle. Hearing this surprised her. It changed how she saw him. Not as a powerful figure who chose distance, but as a human who did not know better at the time. This did not excuse the past, but it softened it. The relationship began to take a new shape. Not built on authority or silence, but on honesty and effort. Some days were still difficult. Old wounds reopened unexpectedly, but now they talked about it. That made all the difference. The girl slowly began to trust her voice. She spoke more freely at school. She raised her hand once during class, surprising herself. Her confidence did not appear overnight, but it grew steadily. The man watched this with quiet pride. Not the pride of achievement, but the pride of witnessing growth. They were both changing. Not because everything was fixed, but because they were willing to keep trying. This part of their journey taught them something important. Healing does not erase the past. It reshapes the future, and for the first time, that future did not feel so uncertain. The changes they were making began to show in ways neither of them expected. Life did not suddenly become perfect, but it became more honest. That honesty was sometimes uncomfortable, but it was real. The girl started noticing herself more. She noticed when she wanted to speak and did not stop herself. She noticed when fear tried to pull her back and how she gently pushed against it. These were small victories, but they mattered. At school, her teachers saw a difference. She still remained calm and thoughtful, but she was no longer invisible. She shared opinions during discussions and asked questions without apologizing for them. Each time she spoke, her confidence grew a little stronger. At home, conversations became part of daily life. They talked while cooking, while walking, and sometimes while sitting quietly in the living room. Not every talk was deep, but every talk was open. The man learned something important during this time. He learned that being present did not always require words. Sometimes it meant sitting beside her and allowing silence to exist without pressure. Other times it meant asking questions and accepting answers he did not expect. He also learned to forgive himself slowly. Guilt had followed him everywhere after that turning point. It showed up in quiet moments and late nights. But he began to understand that regret alone would not heal anything. Change would dot. One evening, the girl spoke about her future. She talked about things she liked, ideas she had never shared before. He listened carefully, resisting the urge to guide or control. For the first time, he saw her not as a child who needed direction, but as a person discovering her own path. That realization humbled him. There were still moments when old habits tried to return. He caught himself interrupting and stopped. She caught herself withdrawing and chose to stay. These moments did not feel like failures anymore. They felt like reminders. The house itself felt different, lighter, more lived in. Laughter appeared occasionally, surprising them both. It was not loud or forced. It came naturally. The girl realized something one quiet night as she sat in her room. She no longer felt alone in the house. The walls no longer felt distant. She felt seen. The man realized something too. Success without connection felt empty. Connection, even when imperfect, gave meaning to everything else. They had both been changed by one honest sentence spoken at the right time. That moment had not broken their relationship. It had rebuilt it. This was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of a different one. One built on listening, patience, and the courage to be real. And for the first time, both of them felt ready to continue forward together as time moved forward. The rhythm of their life continued to change in quiet but meaningful ways. There was no single moment that marked the transformation. Instead, It was built from ordinary days and small decisions that slowly added up to something stronger. The girl began to feel more comfortable in her own thoughts. She no longer questioned every feeling or judged herself for wanting attention. She understood now that wanting to be heard did not make her weak or demanding. It made her human. She started keeping her journal again, but the tone of her writing shifted. The pages were no longer filled only with questions and sadness. They now held observations, moments of pride, and thoughts about who she was becoming. Writing became a way for her to understand herself, not hide herself. The man noticed this change without being told. He saw it in the way she walked into a room, more steady than before. He heard it in her voice, clearer and more confident. These changes reminded him daily of the responsibility he carried, not as a provider, but as a presence. He continued to practice listening in every part of his life. At work, he asked questions and waited for answers. At home, he gave space for feelings without trying to manage them. This was not always easy. Old habits still surfaced, especially during stress. But he was learning to catch himself. One afternoon, they spent time together doing something simple. No purpose, no schedule, just time. They talked about small things, laughed at quiet moments, and allowed the day to pass without rushing it. The simplicity of it stayed with both of them. For the girl, this time felt new. She realized she no longer felt the need to earn his attention. She felt allowed to exist without explanation. That feeling changed how she saw herself. She became more open with others as well. Friendships felt easier. Conversations flowed without fear. She noticed that when she listened to others, they listened back. The balance felt right. The man reflected often on the moment that started everything. He no longer felt shame when he remembered it. Instead, he felt gratitude. That moment had forced him to face a truth he had avoided. Without it, he might have continued believing he was doing everything right. He understood now that love is not proven through control or success. It is proven through presence and patience. There were still difficult days. Emotional wounds do not disappear completely. But now, when pain surfaced, it was spoken instead of hidden. The house had changed too. It felt warmer, less controlled, more alive. It was no longer just a place to return to. It was a place to belong. Both of them understood something important. Healing is not about forgetting the past. It is about learning from it without letting it define the future. They were still learning, still growing, but they were no longer alone in the process. And that made all the difference. By this point in their journey, both of them had changed more than they realized. The changes were not loud or dramatic. They showed up in the way mornings began, in how evenings ended, and in how they spoke to each other when no one else was listening. The girl felt stronger inside. Not because her life had become easier, but because she trusted herself more. She trusted her feelings. She trusted her voice. When something bothered her, she no longer pushed it down immediately. She allowed herself to sit with it and decide whether it needed to be spoken. This was new for her. For years, she had believed that staying quiet kept her safe. Now she was learning that speaking honestly, even when it felt uncomfortable, could also create safety at school. She faced challenges with a different mindset. When she struggled, she asked for help instead of blaming herself. When she succeeded, she allowed herself to feel proud. These changes did not go unnoticed. Teachers commented on her confidence. Friends felt closer to her. At home, the man continued his effort to be present. Some days were harder than others. Work still demanded his attention, and pressure did not disappear. But now, he made conscious choices. He put his phone away during conversations. He listened without preparing a response in his mind. He realized that listening required patience, something he had rarely practiced before. One evening, they talked about the past in a way they never had. The girl spoke openly about moments that had hurt her deeply. She did not accuse him. She simply explained how she had felt. Listening to this was painful for him. Each memory felt like a quiet reminder of a chance he had missed. But he stayed with it. He did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. When she finished, he He thanked her for trusting him with her truth. That gratitude mattered. The girl noticed how different this felt from before. Her words did not disappear into silence. They were received. This part of their relationship was about rebuilding trust. Not through promises, but through consistency. Through showing up again and again, the man began to understand that being a parent was not about authority. It was about responsibility. The responsibility to listen, to learn, and to admit mistakes. There were still moments of doubt. The girl sometimes wondered if the change would last. The man sometimes feared he would fail again. These doubts did not mean progress was lost. They meant both of them cared. They learned to talk about these fears too. The house continued to feel more like a home. Not perfect, not quiet in the same controlled way as before, but alive with honest connection. Both of them understood now that relationships are not built on one moment alone. They are built on what follows, and they were choosing every day to keep going forward. By the time this chapter of their lives arrived, both of them understood something clearly. Growth does not announce itself. It shows up quietly in choices made when no one is watching. The girl felt more grounded than she ever had before. She was still thoughtful, still careful, but no longer afraid of her own voice. When she spoke, she did not rush. She trusted that she would be heard. That trust had changed how she moved through the world. She began to reflect on her past with a softer heart. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She understood now that her silence had been a way to survive, not a sign of weakness. Accepting that truth allowed her to let go of some of the blame she had placed on herself. At home, she spoke more freely. Sometimes she talked about her day. Other times she shared thoughts that surprised even her. She spoke about fears, hopes, and questions about the future. Each time, the man listened without interruption. For him, listening had become a practice. It was no longer something he had to remind himself to do. It had become part of who he was becoming. He noticed how much calmer he felt when he was truly present. The constant pressure to control every outcome had eased. He understood now that not everything needed to be solved. Some things needed to be understood. There was one evening that stood out. They were sitting together, not talking much, just sharing the quiet. The girl suddenly said that she felt proud of how far she had come. Saying it out loud felt strange, but also powerful. He smiled and told her that he was proud too, not because she had changed, but because she had been brave enough to speak when it mattered. That moment felt complete. The journey they had taken together was not about fixing the past. It was about learning from it and choosing a different future. They both knew there would still be challenges ahead. Life would test them in new ways. But now they had something they did not have before: trust, honesty, connection. The moment she told him to be quiet not ended their relationship. It had given it a new beginning, and this time, both of them were ready to keep listening.